Next 45 minutes, 50 minutes, we'll talk about the bugs, right? My name is Jalendra Rizal. I'm a UC Corporate Extension IPM advisor based in Modesto. I cover mostly the insect pest issues in tree nuts and tree crops and other crops also. I cover San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Merced counties. So today I will primarily talk about this new invasive beetle, Carpophilus beetle, and it's a new. So we're also learning about this insect and what kind of damage it does and how we can identify and all of that. Maybe talk a little bit about navel orangeum, what we're seeing out there. In 1 or 2 slides, I'll talk about the brown spot, which is caused by the group of the stink bug species, and go from there. So these are the picture that you've seen is all brown spot. In majority of these brown, so the reason I brought these all kinds of damage is that in the last several years, you might have heard and you might have faced these brown spot issue in the nuts, especially in almonds. And there are all different varieties of the brown spot, as you see in here, and all are caused by piercing and sucking mouthpart insects. So these are more like a stink bug and leaf-footed plant bug causing these different kinds of damage. And depending on what time of the season they are feeding, you might have prominent, nice brown spot versus maybe light brown spot later in the season. If you get the damage early part of the season, you get the whole kernel is gummy. So all of these altogether is basically brown spot. And we have seen this year, actually some of the report from the Blue Diamond, they mentioned that this is the second highest damage after the navel orangeum this year. So these are the major 3 insects that cause those brown spot issues. The leaf-footed plant bug, there is green stink bug, and there is a new, relatively new invasive stink bug species called brown marmorated stink bug, far right, you're seeing. So we do have new trap. Good news is that we have, for the leaf-footed bug, we have a new trap and lure that will be available next year that help people to kind of monitor these insects and find out whether they're present or not, because that's been the case. That's been the challenge, that we don't know whether these insects are present in the orchard or not. And all of a sudden at the harvest, that's where we're seeing the damage. So hopefully these traps will help to find out whether they are present or not, and so that we can make a decision based on that. We also have, for the brown marmorated stink bug, we also have a trap and lure. And this insect is present in our area, Stanislaus County, several locations. So I have been monitoring this insect in the last 4 or 5 years. They can do pretty substantial damage pretty much throughout the season. So if your PCA or you simply put the traps out, that will help to detect the population. The green stink bug in the middle, it's becoming more and more common, which was previously it was more like a late season pest. Now we're seeing pretty much throughout the season and more damage in a lot of orchards. So the green stink bug seems to be a rising problem, increasing problem in the last several years. We don't have any effective trap and lure for this insect. So we're working on that. But it's visual monitoring of the orchard is the best way to find out whether green stink bug are active or not. As I said, majority of the damage we're seeing up and down the valley this year is, or last couple of years, is primarily from this green stink bug insect. Okay, move on to navel orangeum. We all know navel orangeum, that's a moth, that's a damage in the middle. And on the far right side, also some of the evaluation that we've done, and those are the damaged nuts. Okay, so this is the slide I got from El Macedo from Blue Diamond. So if you look at the overall damage, percentage damage rejected by navel orangeum, 2023 was definitely the highest so far, about over 4% damage. This year was not that better too, based on what data I got from them. It's about 3% damage. So it's just still pretty substantial damage navel orangeum is causing in almonds. And this year, also a lot of walnut grower also got navel orangeum damage because of this late population into the orchard. Okay, so this is a kind of seasonal overall population. So So the purple bar you're seeing is the egg laying activity by navel longum. The main thing that I wanted to show here is that pretty much throughout the season we're seeing the navel longum active in the orchard. It's not anymore like where you see the peak in the early and then there is silent period and there is another peak. But it's pretty much throughout the season we're seeing the navel longum activity. So it's more about the opportunity for this insect when the hull split happens, how long it will hull split nuts out there. So all of that thing matters a lot because of their population continues in the orchard. So these are the kind of 4 generations of navel longum we're seeing. And if you looked at the late, even in October 8 or 9, you still see the pretty active population. And so that's why I think the late season pollinizer variety, late variety of almonds as well as the walnuts got hit also because of that increased fourth flight activity and third flight. So what we can do about navel longum, we know that we use 1 or 2 insecticide at hull split time, but the best way to manage navel longum is really doing the winter sanitation. That means all the mummy nuts that are on the tree, on the ground, we need to shred them before they spring. So because navel longum larvae, they basically overwinter inside those mummy nuts on the ground, nuts on the mummies on the tree. So if we can shred them, we'll be essentially killing all that population before the beginning of the season. So that's the whole idea for winter sanitation. And you can see the example of the navel longum overwintering on that mummy nut. So when sanitation is most important factor, it's just like showing how sanitation is effective. So this is a work done in way 1984, the first slide on the left. You can see if you do the only sanitation, there was a lot less damage. If you looked at the 1 insecticide and still had the mummies, about 28 mummies per tree, in that case you can see the damage is much higher. If you have 2 to 3 insecticides, still more the mummies per tree, and you even have a higher damage, right? So that's just kind of giving you an idea is that winter season population reduction approach works really, really good. On the right, you can see the similar trend. So that shows is that how many mummy nuts on the tree when you have, and then what kind of damage you expect from navel longum. So more mummies on the ground, more mummies on the tree, more damage you expect. So now move on to this Carpophilus beetle. It's an invasive pest. We officially found this Carpophilus beetle in fall of 2023, but there has been some damage we found in 2022 also in the orchard because the damage is caused by this beetle, the adult as well as the larva. You can see the larva in there too. They're both tiny, very, very small in size. You can probably see that nut meat on the lower. You can see that the beetle size in comparison to the nut meat there, right? So it's a very, very tiny beetle. Growers in Australia, they have been dealing with this beetle for last 10 years or so. They said it's every year they get 2 to 5% damage from this insect. And this is the insect that go and cause damage or the lay eggs and cause damage similar to navel longum. So in other words, when the hull split happens, they go and cause lay eggs there and then cause damage. As I said, both larva and adult feed on it. So navel longum moth would not feed on, it's only larva. For these guys, both larva as well as adult feed on it. So there are multiple groups of these insects and out there, and so because of that, potentially we missed this insect because now we're finding it pretty much throughout San Joaquin Valley. It's not 1 or 2 counties, it's pretty much all over the place now. This Carpophilus truncatus, this species is the only species that we know they attack the healthy nut on the tree when they are on the tree. Other species of this similar looking beetles, they can attack the fruit, but they are more like ripening fruit, storage and other things. But these Carpophilus truncatus, the new one, is the one that actively attacks the healthy nut. They are still on the tree. This is just the example of that. So these are the 2 different orchards that we collected the sample, and there was overall damage about 12% on that Merced 2 orchard and 38% the other one with the all together damage. And if you looked at the Carpophilus versus navel-orangeum damage, you can see the difference there, right? So about 30% or so Carpophilus in the one orchard, second orchard about 60%. So their infestation rate can vary by orchard to orchard. Also, both navel-orangeum and Carpophilus beetle can attack the same nut. And when that happens, it's very difficult to find out it's a Carpophilus beetle damage because navel-orangeum is much more obvious, and we all train to know, or we know navel-orangeum damage. So that might be another reason that we need to look for the nut and find out whether Carpophilus is present or not. Walnut, also in our county, last year we found in one orchard, very small orchard with the mix of variety, but regardless, we found these Carpophilus beetle in that walnut too, about 4% damage or so based on the sample collected. The good news is that the Chandler variety, we did not find any damage last year as well as this year. So walnut seems to be a little bit more, a lot less susceptible compared to almonds and pistachio. Pistachio, this is, again, when they feed on, they basically feed on pretty much all the nut meat. And that's why you see this powdery mix of the nut meat combined with their frass. Their poops basically just kind of combined with it. And that's why you see the color like that. These are some of the pictures I've taken earlier around the time of the harvest of the pistachio. Those early split as well as the kind of the split nut where you can see the outside cover is basically split, and then also the other intact nut all had the damage when we looked at. That was around mid-September or so. And on that particular orchard was about 5% damage by Carpophilus beetle. We have only about 1.5% damage by navel-orangeum. So it can be tricky. It can be pretty high damage. So these are some of the pictures. Again, if you looked at the beetle size on the middle picture, you can see like on the tip, you can see the sort of black color insect compared to that size of the nut meat, right? So they're very tiny. And they basically feed on there and convert into the powdery stuff. Okay, so these are some of the symptoms you see. Even right now, if you go, or the PCA go to the orchard and look for the nuts, and if they're seeing this white powdery stuff dripping out from those nuts, that is the best indicator. That's the best indicator of Carpophilus beetle damage. Sometimes those natural cracks happen. Other times, beetle basically chew the holes right there on the suture line, and then they'll go in. And so you can see that hole. If you see that hole or the nut meat coming out from the nut, that's the best indicator of that's a Carpophilus beetle attack. Here you can see all of them has on the tip, they have holes, all of them. And sometimes I've seen also the holes on the suture line. Not only in the tips, but also on the suture line too. So if you see the circular hole right there, that's the best indicator of the Carpophilus beetle damage. What kind of damage you see in the nut meat, as I already explained a little bit, it's a powdery mixture. There is a little bit of frass also tangled with it, a little bit of, the webbings also tangled with it. So you can see the kind of slight webbings and then this creamy color powder on the nut for Carpophilus beetle. Here you can see there is a small tiny larva, there is a dog, as I said, they're very small in size, and you can find multiple number of beetles, 5, 7, 10 beetles, 5, 7, 10, 15 larvae in one nut. So they are very, very high number compared to what you expect from navel-orangeum. This seems to be only the beetle feeding damage. So you can see the two beetles there on those nuts. They're basically finishing that nut meat, right? So how do you compare that with the ant damage? If you think about the ant damage, they just basically scoop out the whole nut meat. Some cases, other cases you have very dry, loose powder, white powder on the ground. So that's ant damage. But for the Carpophilus beetle damage, you can see the frass, the nut meat powder and a little bit of frass just kind of tangle in there. So that's how you can differentiate between these two. Other times you can, we also have published this report with the visual guide for all things Carpophilus versus Nabelungem versus ant. So you can see this is 4 or 5 pages. So there's a lot of pictures and things, and you can get it from there. If you can take the picture from that QR code, you should be able to get that, or you can send me an email, or you can Google. You should be able to find this accessible in the internet. So Nabelungem versus Carpophilus beetle. For the Nabelungem on your left, you can see a lot more webbings, brownish color frass and bigger chunk of frass, and plus a lot webbings. Versus on the right, you can see more finer. Still there is a little bit of webbing, but it's distinctly different if they are attacking the different nuts, right? But other time we see the same, both insect attack the same nuts. In that case, it can be a little bit challenging. But again, indicator would be that, cream color, white color nut meat powder. So this is more up from that visual guide. One thing I want to mention is that if you see the larva, the best indicator to find whether it's a Carpophilus beetle larva or not, look at the cream color larva and then their tail. So that they have a 2 projection at the end. For Carpophilus beetle, Nabelungem would not have that. So if you see anything like that, creamy color larva with the 2 projection at the end, 2 tails, then that's a Carpophilus beetle larva. So how they infest in terms of what's their infestation cycle during the season, right? So as soon as hollow split happens, these beetles they're on the ground on the mummy nuts. They just fly up and lay eggs in there. Sometimes they make a hole and then lay eggs right there, or sometimes they go inside and they lay eggs inside. Just randomly, it doesn't really matter where they lay eggs. They lay eggs on the nut. And then larvae will basically go and continuously feed on it. Unlike Nabelungem, these larvae will continuously feeding, and then the advanced stage of larva has to drop on the ground for pupation. So for the pupa, they needs to be on the ground, versus Nabelungem, they pupate on the inside the nut. So that means they pupate on the ground, the adult again emerge from the ground, and again do the same cycle, right? So we don't know how many cycles they will do after the hollow split, but certainly multiple time they can they do this damage, and also their life cycle is pretty short, so they can complete life cycle in about 2.5-3 weeks. Versus Nabelungem, at least it takes a month, even the August time, right? So they can have multiple generation from all the way early July through even October. So this is what's showing that we did this year. We basically collected a bunch of these mummy nuts that are infested by Carpophilus, put them into the small tent cage out there in the field, and these tent they have a kind of capture container on the top, and so we wanted to look at when these beetles become active and then go into that trap. And so this is what we're seeing. So mid-June, so that is the good timing for them to be active, so that whenever hollow split happens, late June or early July, that's where they go in and cause the damage. And you see another peak in around the mid-July. Another peak is also in the mid-August. We basically discontinued the work after that point because of the squirrel problem. All the mummies that we had already fed by the Carpophilus to finish the whole thing, so we would not continue that. But you get the idea that when these adults become active, and these are the timing when the hollow split happens. So we need to keep that in mind. In terms of their egg and larva on those mummies, so we collect every week those mummies and then look at the larva eggs on those mummies individually. And when we looked at that, pretty much throughout the season, we see the larval presence in there. So again, these are all happening on the ground mummies. So mummies on the ground are critical for their survival, for the reproduction of these beetles. If there is no mummies on the ground, they will not survive. There is no way they can survive. So the ground mummies are critically important. We think that it's important for Nabelungum. For these guys, it's critically important to have ground mummies on the ground for their survival. So you know where I'm going with that. So winter sanitation, removing these mummies is critically important for these insects. We also have a trap where we start looking at some of the pheromone trap. And so you can see in the middle, those are the beetles we collected in 1 week. So there were 8,000 beetles we collected in one trap in a week. We're not counting them, we're not sorting them, we're just weighing them right now because there is no way we can count them, right? So there are numbers. What I'm trying to say with that is that their number on the ground on the orchard floor is way, way, way higher than what you think about other insects. So that's why they can cause significant damage in the orchard. Okay, so other things can be done for nut sampling at the hull split time and after. Any time when you look at the split almonds, you can look and crack open and see the beetles there. They're usually between hull and cell, so it's important to remove the hull and look for the beetle inside them. And so that's why it's very difficult to manage these beetles when a hull split happens, because they go between hull and cell, unlike Nabelungum. And so if that happens, there's no way you can get the insecticide. How many times you spray, you won't have the access to those beetles. Beetle would not access the insecticide. Also, the mummy nut sampling also would be the way to find out whether the beetle are present or not in the orchard. So this is a work done in Australia, so you can see the funny dates there, right? Not funny, but it's a mid-January is our mid-July. So when hull split happens, they did not see any damage on those nuts at that time, which makes sense because beetles are just moving on at that time. And when you week after and after and after, that's where we're seeing the increasing number of those beetles, damage happening in the orchard. And we expect the same thing. These are some of the pictures that we've taken from this year in one of the orchard in our area, in Modesto, in Waterford. You can see the beetles on that green nut. And also, at the same time, when we're seeing the beetles up there, we're also seeing the beetles all over on the ground mummies. Look at the quality of that mummy nut. There is nothing left in there, but still there are multiple beetles surviving in there. So the ground environment, whether a little bit of moisture, a little bit of humidity, maybe a little bit of grasses in there, those environment and a little bit of fungus on those nuts, those are the environment that they thrive the best. So unlike Nabelungum, those environment are bad for Nabelungum. For these guys, those environment is good for them. So moist condition, on the ground condition, they survive really well on the ground. Okay, so these are some of the eggs. You can see the white color, kind of elongated eggs. They can lay eggs in any place within the nut. We have seen in the nut meat, we have seen the outside on the cell, we have seen between hull and cell and everywhere. You can see how many beetles there in that between the hull and cell in one nut, right? We have seen a lot of that. So it's a number game, really. I already mentioned this is fungus or these mold infested nuts are really good for Carpophilus. So anything you have in the ground is good for them. You can see those are some of the example. Okay, so you can see the holes on those mummy nuts. Those are also indicative of the Carpophilus. We have seen so far the soft cell variety are more susceptible. Nonpareil, Independence, Sonora, Fridge, Carmel, Monterey, these variety where we are seeing the damage. It doesn't mean that they are doing damage in one variety versus other based on this, because these are from different area, different orchard. But these softer cell variety are more susceptible than the hard cell variety like Butte Padre, which is kind of similar to Nabelungum. We also look at, different layer of the tree. We see mid to lower part of the tree. That's why most infestation happening. Again, the idea is that their biology, they are surviving on the ground, so they just go, whenever they find the nuts, then they will infest on that. For Nabelungum, you see more damage on the upper part of the tree, where for the Carpophilus, it's kind of reverse. We also see the orchard edge has more damage, borders have more damage than the interior. Again, these are some of the things that we're kind of learning. This is our first season dealing with this bug, and so we're learning as we go basis. Okay, so in terms of the managing this insect, of course, as I mentioned, navel longum is, the winter scent is critical for navel longum, very important part. For Carpophilus beetle, it seems to be essential part of Carpophilus management. Ground mummies, flail mowing and then shredding them, even not one pass. The Australian scientists, they recommend at least do the 2 passes, because, you know, if you miss some of those nuts or it's not completely split, the beetles can still survive on them. So it's a really, really paying attention, bringing all the nuts in the middle from those berms and from the irrigation line, tree line is critically important. And also the disking is not going to help, because they like that soil environment. Even if you deep into like 1 feet, 2 feet down in the soil, they still can emerge back. So that's not going to help. So it's really the shredding the nuts effectively is the way to go. We did some insecticide trial. I'm not going to talk too much detail on this one, but essentially we apply the insecticide that are commonly applied for navel longum and for stink bug in almond orchard. So common insecticide, then we think that, well, it might have some efficacy. Those are the ones that we included in our trial. It's a replicated trial. It's one orchard. We did only for the non-pearl rows. And we applied twice. So one was July 10th and July 24th. So it's about 2 weeks interval, right? So it's kind of more or less navel longum timing in there. And we looked at the damage in there. So this is a percentage damage. So the UTC, if you see that line, that means untreated control. So we had about 22% damage in this particular orchard. With the only Carpophilus beetle, it's not navel longum included, just the Carpophilus beetle, was 22% in untreated one, and treated one were anywhere from 14 to 25%. So you can see the little bit of reduction, but none of them are statistically significant. As I mentioned already, it's not because the insecticide would not kill them. It's the insecticide would not reach where they are. That's the main problem. So the coverage is the problem. So if that continue to happen, I don't think that how many times we spray, we still probably get the same results. I'm not saying that we should not use this at all. We'll still look into the timing, maybe the 3rd spray or some other ways that maybe gets this little better. We don't know, because the Australian scientists also share the same thing. They also tried some of these insecticide. It's not very reliable, and that's what they're going into the winter sanitation. Orchard hygiene is the really things to go. The other difference about navel longum versus this one, navel longum, even though you see a lot of navel longum out there, still compared to these guys, their number is lower. So when you have, you know, a lot of insect out there, even with the effective insecticide, it's hard to get that under control, right? So the best line of defense, what I have seen in the multiple orchard, on these beetle feeding is really doing that winter sanitation. I don't see even how it's possible to control this insect without doing winter sanitation, because that's where you're seeing the beetles everywhere throughout the season on the ground. So yeah, that's just a summary. It's a newly confirmed insect. We're also learning about their biology, behavior, and things as we go basis. But we did some of the preliminary insecticide trial. We did some of the preliminary understanding about these beetle. They overwinter as an adult in the winter time, and primarily on the ground mummies. And so how we can control those ground mummies, remove those, shred them. That's the best way to reduce that population significantly. And anything you apply at the hollow split time, at that point, should help a little bit. But based on our at least a 1-year trial, didn't seem it's helping too much. And yeah, with that, I would like to thank all the people helping me on this project, and plus also Almond board and Pistachio board for providing a little bit of research funding. Oh, yeah, so I have a field meeting organized. It's not for the Carpophilus enable ongum, but next week on 21st, I have a field meeting on flat-headed borer. I know that many of you might not have heard of it, but if you are growing walnut, a lot of people are also dealing with these insects. It feed on the branches and cause the damage. And we're having the field meeting in Stockton area next week. So if you're interested, feel free to join. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
What about when we get it in a stockpile? Will fumigation kill it in the stockpile, or?
Stockpile, yeah. Well, I don't have direct experience, but I have talked to some of the people involved in that. What I have heard so far is that the concentration that we're using for navel ongum is not working. So more concentration needed, and more work is needed in that area. So it's another whole different area that we have not figured it out yet. And it's essentially a storage pest, so they can do quite well in that stockpile situation. So yeah. None? Okay. Well, hopefully it's not too depressing news. You know, we always have the invasive pest coming and going, but whatever we have learned about this Carpophilus beetle, I wanted to share so that people know this is the right time right now. In the winter time, we have a little bit of rain also. This is the best time. Any time from November through to February 1st is the good time to shake those trees, remove all these mummies on the ground, and then shred them before by mid-March or so. It helps navel ongum as well as Carpophilus beetle, and the direction that we're seeing with navel ongum damage last couple of years, you all know it's a pretty high, and on top of that Carpophilus, so there is another good reason to do the winter sanitation. So that's my final message.